Turn off the light. Michael won't be home tonight. I froze behind the half-closed door when I heard those words. My throat closed up, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through my chest. Through the narrow gap, I could see my son's fiancée, Vanessa, standing between my husband Robert's legs, his hands wrapped tightly around her waist. The soft lamplight cast long shadows across the living room of Magnolia Haven, the home I had spent 4 decades building with my own hands. I stood still like a trespasser in my own house. Then I pulled out my phone and hit record. Just as I was about to burst in, I saw Michael, my son, standing at the end of the hallway, his face calm in a way that chilled me to the bone. He whispered, "Mom, I already know, and what I found out is far worse than anything you could imagine." There are moments when you feel your entire life collapse like a wooden house in a storm. I am Eleanor Williams, 65 years old, and I never imagined betrayal could cut so deep at this stage of my life. That morning had started like any other. I woke while the fog was still low over Atlanta's outskirts. The oven was just hot enough for a batch of buttermilk waffles, and the coffee dark roast from a small shop on Peachtree Street was dripping steadily into the pot. My routine rarely changes. Proof the dough the night before, roll it out in the morning, and turn on the local radio about Georgia weather. I've always believed small habits keep you steady. Life in your later years needs that kind of discipline. Robert, my husband of 43 years, usually gets up early to help me set out trays and check the hot water lines. This morning he vanished, leaving a hurried note. "Down to the basement to check the pipes. Heard a hiss. Don't worry." In a century-old house like Magnolia Haven, hisses and little clicks in the pipes are normal. They're like the size of old wood. I didn't question it. I dusted sugar over the waffles, opened the kitchen window to let in the morning mist, and glanced at the wall clock. 6:15 a.m. Vanessa, my son Michael's fiancée, had said last night she'd sleep in the main house so she could try on her wedding dress with a local seamstress in the morning. She said, "The natural light in the living room is better than a studio." I agreed. Michael was staying at his apartment near the new restaurant where he worked as a chef, convenient for early shifts, and to keep things traditional before the wedding. I had carefully pressed an ivory silk robe and had Vanessa embroidered on the cuff as a welcome gift for my future daughter-in-law. The coffee was steaming, and guests in the first 3 rooms had requested breakfast at 7:00 a.m. I carried a fruit tray, planning to walk down the hall to the big fridge near the living room. And that's when a thread-thin whisper drifted out from the half-open door. Not the radio, not wood ticking. A voice soft, low, and intimate, in the way I'd heard all my life with my husband. My hand paused on the knob, the other hand tugging at my apron. I didn't knock. A woman's intuition, or maybe basic self-preservation, kept me still. I leaned in. Just a narrow strip of light, but enough. Robert sat on the edge of the living room settee, the blue shirt I had just ironed 2 days ago unbuttoned to the 3rd button. Vanessa stood between his legs, hair loosely tied, wearing the silk robe I'd given her that one parted just enough for Robert's hand to rest on her waist. It was too clear to fool myself with any other words. I heard Vanessa's soft voice, "Turn off the light. Michael won't be home tonight." Hearing my son's name in that scene hit me in the chest like a hammer. In one heartbeat my whole life, 3 decades at the stove, our first winter after buying this place, the nights counting every saved dollar turned into the backdrop for a cruel joke. I didn't scream. I didn't shove the door. I didn't scratch or grab something to throw. I pulled out my phone, hit record, my palm cold like it had touched ice water. Partly instinct to preserve evidence, partly because I knew my shouting would only blow apart the hearth I had spent years tending. I backed away, placing each step like a thief in my own home, afraid even a small cough would shatter the mask being worn in there. As I turned, I saw a figure at the end of the hall, tall, lean shoulders drooping like he'd been carrying something too heavy. Michael. My son's face was paper pale, but his eyes were strangely calm, the kind of calm you have after you walk through the storm first and come back to guide someone else. He didn't touch me. He just raised 2 fingers, a small shushing gesture, and tilted his head toward the back door. I nodded, mouth-dry, legs shaking so much I had to brace against the darkened timber wall. We passed the row of family photos, Christmas at Stone Mountain. Robert's birthday. Michael in his cap and gown, moments that were once warm now looked like shattered glass. The back porch met us with the smell of magnolia blossoms, birds in the woods, and the neighbor's mower far off. I gripped the wooden arm of the chair, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. "How long?" I asked, my voice so hoarse I barely recognized it. 3 months, Michael said, swallowing something like a stone stuck in his throat. He didn't look at me. He looked past my shoulder to the green ridges in the distance, like his next words needed the whole Georgia landscape to hold them up. "And there's worse." I waited. There are moments when you know you're standing at a cliff edge, and what you're about to hear decides whether you fall or fly. "I didn't want you to find out like this," Michael said, his calm voice running over a fierce current. "I tried to keep things steady for you, but—" He stopped, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were screenshots, emails, and a few powers of attorney signed Eleanor E. Williams. My name, but not my hand. Like someone had learned to write my name almost perfectly, except for one tiny mistake only I'd know. The E in Eleanor. I always hook at a habit from high school. On those papers, it was a straight nail-like line. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Robert set up an LLC called Magnolia Haven LLC 2 years ago," Michael said, voice flat like reading test results. "Then used those powers of attorney to transfer pieces of the inn's interests into it. Vanessa, did you know she used to work for Crown Ridge Holdings? They scoop up historic homes and turn them into boutique resorts." A dizzy wave made the scene tilt for a second. The wooden chairs, the wind chime, the freshly watered magnolias all snapped back into place. My trust didn't. "Why?" I asked the dumbest and truest question of my life. "For money." Michael pressed his lips together. "To sell Mom. To sell Magnolia Haven. Prices are up because of the new highway. Crown Ridge floated a strategic partnership. We keep a minority stake. They take operations. Then in a few years, they swallow it all." He exhaled. "I ended it with Vanessa in my head the moment I knew. But I didn't want you shattered. I thought waiting until after the wedding would keep things quieter. Then I gathered proof, found an attorney. I wanted to protect you first." I looked at my hands, knuckles thin callous at the base of my thumb from years with a wooden spoon, sunspots from watering plants. These hands built a place called Magnolia Haven. I set them on the chair's arm, letting the cool wood pull me out of the shock. "What do we do?" I asked, then remembered this was only the start of the storm. "I've reached Maya Washington," Michael said, "an attorney who does real estate and signature fraud. We can meet today." "But Mom—" He paused, and for the first time his steady eyes wavered. "Can you handle it? You'll have to act like you don't know. Buy us time. You'll have to look at them and say nothing." I took a deep breath. The briny pine and coffee in my mouth held me steady. From the back porch, I could see into the living room where the first light painted a gold stripe across the patterned rug I found at a flea market 10 years ago. I heard cups clink on a tray, probably Robert pouring coffee. I heard Vanessa's small laugh, the one I used to think was shy. Every familiar sound warped like a dream heard through water. "I've kept Magnolia Haven burning for 40 years, I said, surprised my voice was as solid as the wood under my hand. "I can stand a few more days to save it." I lifted my chin and met my son's eyes. From now on, not one brick of Magnolia Haven leaves our hands. Michael nodded, that calm settling back on him like a coat he puts on to shield me. "Then I'll call Maya. I'll get the files ready." And he lowered his voice. "Mom, don't be alone with them unless you have to. I'll be around." I smoothed my apron and straightened my hair clip. I looked at my brown leather flats worn at the outer heel habit of a kitchen worker who moves fast. "Let's go," I said. "Guests will be down for breakfast. Magnolia Haven still has to burn." I walked back in and opened the door wide like it had never been closed. The smell of coffee and buttered sugar greeted me like any morning. The only difference was my heart knew. And as I set the fruit platter on the counter and heard Robert's steps on the stairs, I understood the last peaceful morning of my life had just ended quietly, like a flame shifting color before it flares. Michael didn't say anything else out on the porch. He motioned for me to follow down the hall and opened the small office at the end. I rarely went in there. Robert used to say it was Michael's space for grad school papers. Later, my son kept the habit of locking the metal file cabinet and never letting me touch it. Today, that door opened and I realized my child had been preparing something much bigger than I imagined. The room was dim, bright, with early sun through burlap curtains. Old wood and printer paper smell tightened my chest because I knew I was about to face the truth. Michael knelt and turned the dial on a black safe against the wall. Metal clicks echoed in the quiet, and my insides clenched. A few seconds later, the door swung open. Michael pulled out a thick, worn envelope and set it in front of me, sliding it over like a ritual of handing over evidence. I dragged a wooden chair closer, and hands shaking opened it. Out fell pages, messages, screenshots, credit card statements, printed emails. In a few photos, I saw Robert's number on the screen with syrupy texts to Vanessa. "Miss you tonight. Room 307 is set." I read and felt my heart sink, beat by beat. Those locations were all local hotels places Robert told me he had to stop by to meet a table linen supplier or look at lumber for repairs. Everyone lined up with times he was gone, leaving me alone with Magnolia Haven. "I found this 3 months ago," Michael said quietly, eyes on the desk voice, even like he was trying to keep me from collapsing. At first I thought it was dumb flirting, but when the hotel bookings matched Dad's trips, I couldn't deny it. I folded my fingers, nails biting my palms to stop the shaking. "Did you say anything to Vanessa?" I tried to keep my voice steady, though my chest hurt. Michael nodded. "I confronted her. At first she denied it, said I was paranoid. When I showed her the photos, she changed tone right away." His jaw tightened. "She said I didn't need to be miserable, that it could be a 3-way arrangement if I played along." He let out a harsh metal-on-metal laugh. I walked out. From that day, I knew this wedding was a con. I opened my mouth, but my throat closed. In the stack, I suddenly saw a few legal authorizations. At the bottom, Eleanor Williams sat clear and bold. My hand jerked. My heart felt squeezed. The writing looked so real. I touched it to be sure it wasn't mine, but I saw the tell. My E in Eleanor has always had a soft hook. Here it was a stiff, flat line. I looked up, gasping. "They forged my signature." Michael nodded, anger flashing. "I think Dad's been doing this for a while. He set up a company called Magnolia Haven LLC 2 years back. Since then, he's been quietly shifting assets from the inn into it using those forged authorizations to paper it over." My ears rang. The familiar wood walls felt like they were closing in. "So it's not just an affair," I whispered. "No, Mom," Michael said, voice hardening. "Vanessa isn't the sweet girl you thought." Before coming to Atlanta, she worked for Crown Ridge Holdings, a company that scoops up heritage buildings and turns them into luxury resorts. To them, Magnolia Haven is just a rare commodity. Prime location, historic architecture values soaring. Vanessa was sent here, and Dad went along. A cold line ran down my spine. In my head flickered the porch where I embroidered pillows, the stone steps Robert and I chipped out years ago, the white magnolia garden I tend every spring. All of it bait for someone else to price weigh and sell off. I looked at my son. "So they're planned the wedding just to legitimize it." Michael gripped the desk edge, pain and anger lighting his eyes. "Exactly. The ceremony is just theater. After the wedding, they'd have a legal path to control everything, then sell it all. And after that—" He paused, lips tight. "They'd disappear, Mom. Disappear with everything we spent a lifetime building." I couldn't say another word. In that moment, I knew the thin piece I'd clung to for decades had cracked for good. Every memory, every drop of sweat, every year Robert and I stacked to build this home was being haggled over on a stranger's table. I put my hands on the stack of papers and looked straight at Michael. "Well then, son, if they've scripted our lives, it's our turn to rewrite the ending." I bent down, hands trembling slightly, as I turned each page in the file Michael had prepared. On the cover, the bold line read, "Strategic Partnership Proposal." It sounded flashy, but a few lines in, and I knew this wasn't partnership. It was a disguised takeover. People say dry documents never lie, and when they're right in front of you, they feel like an indictment. They plan to turn my home Magnolia Haven into a premium travel product, a cold phrase with no heart in it. I thought about the last few years, how the land around Atlanta heated up day by day. The new highway made it easier for tourists from Florida and Tennessee to get here. And bit by bit, the area became a favorite for deep-pocketed buyers, snapping up old houses and small hotels to flip into resorts. I used to be proud that our little Magnolia Haven kept its original warmth so different from the glossy hotels springing up nearby. Now it turns out that very authenticity made it a rare commodity. They looked and saw profit. I looked and saw a lifetime of memories. Robert's words echoed in my head, those times he sat on the porch with a beer and blurted, "Wish we could just sell it all, head to Florida, buy a house on the beach. No worries, just sun and waves." I laughed back then, thinking he was joking because for 40 years he seemed tied to these Georgia pines. Turns out it wasn't idle talk. It was a real dream, and Vanessa turned it into a lever. My throat went dry as I wondered when the man I trusted became someone who could betray so easily. Michael sat across from me, eyes sad but steady. He started from the beginning, wanting me to see it clearly. Vanessa didn't just happen into his life. In the culinary class at Emory's continuing education program, she approached him first, made friends first, and slowly slid into every corner of Michael's life. "Do you remember the first time I brought Vanessa home?" She went on about loving old houses and family dinners by the fire, Michael asked. And I remembered. I'd been happy then, thinking my son had found a soulful girl who valued tradition. Now I know those were rehearsed lines meant to soften me up. The more I listened, the clearer it felt like a pre-written play. Love at first glance in class, a quick engagement, then Robert and Vanessa handling paperwork, and finally selling Magnolia Haven into Crown Ridge Holdings. Each step locked into the next with a cold precision. A shiver ran through me. What was my role? The gentle blind mother who'd nod on the wedding day, smile for photos, then get quietly pushed out of the home she built. It was all scripted, just waiting for me to hit my marks. Michael lowered his head voice tight but firm. "I decided a while ago I'm not marrying Vanessa. I didn't say it yet because I wanted you safe first. If I broke it off suddenly, she and Dad would know something's up and might do something reckless." I looked at my son and saw both the child I once lulled to sleep by the fire and the man ready to carry the weight to protect his mother. My nose stung with tears I refused to shed. I set my hand on the table and drew a deep breath. "Michael, I won't let anyone take even a single brick from Magnolia Haven. This is our home, our blood, our tears, all the years we've poured into it. If they want to steal it, they'll have to get through me first." The words came out like a vow. I never imagined I'd face my husband and future daughter-in-law as enemies, but I'd never felt a fire this strong inside me either. We sat for hours in that small office, the wall clock ticking between each sentence. In the end, we made a decision. Find an independent attorney with no ties to Robert or anyone around here and do it quietly, step by solid step, without tipping our hand. One small mistake, and they'd get suspicious and speed things up. I pulled an old notebook from the drawer. From that day, I started logging everything. Dates times the tiniest details, when Robert was gone, who Vanessa called, things they said when they thought I couldn't hear. I wrote like a witness in my own home, building a file no one could deny. My pen sometimes shook, but line by line the writing sharpened like carving into stone. Every time I closed the notebook, I looked around the room. The hand-built shelves, the fireplace where generations of guests had gathered, the windows opening onto the garden I've tended plant by plant. All of it seemed to whisper, "Don't let us disappear." And I promised myself, Michael and our family's past, this is a fight I am not allowed to lose. We met attorney Maya Washington in a small office downtown on the second floor of a red brick building more than half a century old. Sunlight poured through a big window, but inside it was calm and almost solemn, just the sound of pages turning and a pen sliding over old wood. Maya, a black woman in her early 50s, had sharp eyes and a steady voice. I'd heard she specialized in real estate and signature fraud. That's why Michael had booked her. She listened without interruption, nodding or jotting notes now and then. She examined every document from Michael, lingering long over the signatures with my name. When everything lay in a neat stack, she looked up at me and said firmly, "Mrs." Williams, this shows clear signs of forgery, fraud, and unlawful asset transfer. This isn't just a family dispute, it's criminal behavior. The words cut like a blade. Painful, but also a relief. Finally, someone saw and named what Robert and Vanessa were doing. I didn't have to doubt myself anymore. Maya placed her hand over mine, her gaze direct and understanding. "Eleanor," she said, using my first name with a quiet authority, "this is more than just a property fraud case. This is a betrayal of family trust. We're not just fighting for a house, we're fighting for your dignity." Something in her words touched a deep part of me. For months, I'd felt invisible, an aging black woman whose opinions and ownership could be so easily dismissed. Maya saw me fully. "Crown Ridge Holdings has a history," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "They target older property owners, especially women of color with valuable assets. They send people like Vanessa to build trust and manipulate emotions. You're not their first target, but if I have anything to say about it, you might be the one who stops them." I straightened in my chair, drawing strength from her words. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I felt a spark of righteous anger replacing the hurt. Maya continued, "The best plan now is to file a civil action at the county court and request an emergency order to freeze all transactions tied to Magnolia Haven. If granted, no one can transfer, sell, or mortgage the property until the court rules." Michael exhaled, and my heart pounded. I asked, "How soon would that order take effect?" Maya said, "If we prep the evidence a few days. Meanwhile, I'll notify local banks and the county recorder to flag any suspicious activity. That way we lock the front door and bolt the side ones." I clenched both hands in my lap. Robert wouldn't take it well if all his exits got sealed. As if reading my mind, Maya leaned in, voice slow but serious. "You should be prepared. When people sense their plan is threatened, they may try to wipe evidence, burn documents, destroy contracts, or move money fast. It's common in cases like this." A chill ran down my spine. For years, I believed we had nothing to hide, and this house was the safest place on earth. Now I had to consider my husband might turn into the one to destroy it all with fire or worse. I glanced at Michael and saw his brow pinched with worry. I drew a long breath and said clearly, "If we want to protect Magnolia Haven, we have to act normal. I'll keep cooking breakfast, greeting guests, smiling like always. The more they believe I don't know, the more time we get." Michael turned to me, voice nearly breaking. "Are you sure you can handle that? Seeing them every day, pretending in front of the man who betrayed you? I'm afraid it'll wear you down." I took my work-roughened hand and set it over his strong but tired one. "Michael," I whispered, "I built this place with these hands. The walls, the bricks, the boards, my sweat is in them. If I have to pretend a few more days to save it, I can. This isn't the first time I've been patient to protect our family." Pride and hurt flashed in Michael's eyes. He nodded, then looked at Maya. "Only the three of us know everything. No one else. We want to keep the circle tight." Maya nodded. "Good. The fewer who know, the safer. I'll handle all filings myself. In parallel, I'll contact Lieutenant James Ramirez at the police department. When the threshold is met, they'll open a formal criminal investigation. For now, we keep it quiet." Hearing Ramirez's name reminded me. I'd seen him at community events, a tall Latino man with a steady, serious gaze. I'd heard he was relentless in property fraud cases. Knowing he'd be in charge made me feel like the law was a shield at my back. We wrapped after more than 2 hours. When we stepped out of Maya's office, Atlanta's sky had turned gray. Heavy clouds signaling a hard rain. I pulled up my scarf and looked toward the city's skyline, a strange surge of resolve rising in me. For the first time since I discovered the betrayal, I didn't feel like an abandoned wife or a dismissed mother. I felt like the owner of Magnolia Haven, and I would fight to keep it. Michael drove home in silence. Only when the inn's familiar roofs came into view did I say softly, "From now on, we're in a big play. Remember, every look, every gesture can be scrutinized. The better we perform, the closer we get to winning." Michael tightened his grip on the wheel, tense but resolute. "You won't be acting alone. I'm here." I looked out the window at the garden I've tended for decades. Beds, trees, grass, everything stood quiet, witnesses to what I was about to defend. A silent vow rose in me. No matter who they are or how slick their plan is, I won't let a single brick of Magnolia Haven slip from my hands. The next morning, I went to the kitchen earlier than usual. The batter I'd mixed the night before just needed the oven's heat to fill the house with that warm scent. I set the table, making each move slow and natural. When Vanessa came in, hair a little tousled, I smiled as if I knew nothing. "What bouquet are you thinking for the ceremony? I think peonies would suit you," I said evenly. Vanessa flinched for half a second, eyes wide, then snapped back to her cheerful self. She smiled sweetly and started debating between white roses and orchids. I nodded along, pouring milk like a model mother-in-law. Inside, every word felt like a blade. Robert walked in with his coffee. He made it his old way, extra grounds, hardly any sugar, filling the kitchen with a bitter, harsh aroma. I watched him stir slowly, eyes dodging mine. I know his tiny habits better than anyone, and that fake calm routine only made his anxiety show more. I pushed a little further. While plating pastries, I said casually, "I should probably call the church and postpone the ceremony a bit. My aunt in Boston is in the hospital, and you know she treats Michael like her own. It would be awful if she couldn't be there." Vanessa froze for exactly half a second, eyes wide, then nodded quickly. "Oh, I completely understand. Family comes first. We can push it a few weeks. It's fine." Her words were soft, but I saw her fingers clamp the napkin harder than usual. Robert looked up, flicked a glance toward Michael like he was testing for a crack. My son kept a calm face, took a bite of pastry, then shifted the topic to new breakfast options for guests. The whole table sat in a silent play. Everyone understood. That afternoon, after the guests left to explore, I sat quietly in the office with a thick stack of forms. I started the application to designate Magnolia Haven as a local historic property. Those dry lines about cultural value and distinctive architecture became the steel deadbolts I set on my home. If approved, any sweeping renovations or demolition plans would be stopped by law. Each sentence I wrote felt like another lock, another shield for the place that's held my life. When I signed my name, my hand was steady in a way it hadn't been for days. Eleanor E. Williams came out clear. No shake, no tilt, the E with its familiar hook. For the first time in days, I felt a piece of control return to me. Night fell with a light mist outside. I kept the reading room lamp on, pretending to review bookings. Then a strange whisper pulled me from the desk. I stepped softly onto the back porch, heart pounding. Vanessa's voice, low and firm, cut through the dark. "We need to speed it up. The buyer's getting impatient. They want to close soon." That line, "we need to speed it up. The buyer's getting impatient," might sound like business, but in this house it was a knife in a mother's heart. I couldn't see who she was talking to, only Vanessa's slim frame under the dim yellow light. I stepped back silent, my heart hammered, but my mind was bright as a lamp. Back in the room, I opened my notebook and wrote down the time, the place, every word Vanessa said. Then I snapped a photo and sent it to Maya through an encrypted app. Every line, every bit of data felt like a heavy stone I was adding to the scales of justice. That night, I lay beside Robert, listening to his steady breathing. Outside, the Georgia wind hissed through the window seams with a chill. I stared at the ceiling, feeling tension wrap around me like fog. But instead of fear, I felt a growing resolve. I knew the fight would be long, but step by step, piece by piece, Michael and I would build a wall they couldn't climb to steal our home. As I drifted toward sleep, a thought crystallized with perfect clarity. This battle was about more than bricks and mortar. It was about every woman my age who's been pushed aside, every Black business owner whose success becomes a target, every mother who built something only to see others try to take credit. Magnolia Haven wasn't just my home, it was my legacy, and I would defend it with everything I had. The morning light fell differently on Magnolia Haven now. The same golden rays streamed through the same lace curtains, but everything they touched had changed. I moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, my hands remembering what to do, even as my mind whirled with plans and fears. The knife chopped strawberries in perfect rhythm. The batter poured in smooth circles. Outside my window, Atlanta suburbs were just waking up, unaware that inside these century-old walls, a silent battle had begun. I had always believed that at 65, life would settle into a gentle pattern. How wrong I was. Now I rose each day to play a part in a performance where the stakes were my entire life's work. The first week of pretending was the hardest. Every good morning to Robert felt like pebbles in my mouth. Every smile at Vanessa strained the muscles in my face. I watched them both with new eyes, searching for tells I had missed before. Robert's habit of checking his phone under the table. Vanessa's too bright laugh whenever Michael was mentioned. I noticed how they exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. Small nods, raised eyebrows, a private language between conspirators. And all the while I kept my face pleasant and my voice steady, the performance of a lifetime. "Eleanor, have you seen that file with the property tax records?" Robert asked one morning, his voice casual, eyes not quite meeting mine. "I thought I'd organize things a bit." I remembered Maya's warning about evidence disappearing. "I put those in the safety deposit box at the bank last month." I lied smoothly. The assessor called about some question with the historical designation. The flicker of frustration in his eyes was gone so quickly I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching so carefully. He smiled and nodded, but I saw his fingers tighten around his coffee cup. "Always thinking ahead," he said, and the compliment felt like an accusation. That evening I slipped away to the garden shed, pulled out my cell phone, and called Maya. The connection crackled as I kept my voice low, crickets chirping in the background. "He's looking for documents, tax records specifically." Maya's voice came through clear and focused. "The emergency order is being processed. Judge Harmon should sign it by Friday. Until then, keep everything important away from the house." I leaned against the rough wooden wall, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down. How much longer do I have to live like this in my own home? The line went quiet for a moment before Maya answered, her voice gentle but firm. "Every day you maintain this act is another day we build our case stronger. I know it's hard, Eleanor, but you're doing exactly what needs to be done." I hung up and stared at the twilight settling over the magnolia trees. The white blossoms glowed like pale moons in the dimming light. My grandmother had taught me about magnolias when I was just a girl. "They look delicate," she'd said, "but they're tough as old boots. Take more than a storm to knock them down." I straightened my shoulders. If a magnolia could weather centuries, I could weather this. The next morning, I opened the mail to find a thick envelope from the County Historical Society. Inside was the application I had submitted to designate Magnolia Haven as a historic property. Across the top in red ink was stamped "Processing." My small victory made me smile as I tucked it away in my apron pocket before anyone else could see. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard Vanessa's voice drifting through the open window. She was on the porch speaking in hushed tones on her phone. I moved closer to the window, pretending to water the herbs on the sill. "We need to speed things up," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "The buyer is getting impatient. They want to close soon." My heart quickened, but I kept my movement steady, straining to hear more. "I don't care what he says about timing. Once we have the paperwork finalized, we can push things through faster. No, she doesn't suspect anything." A pause, then a small laugh that chilled me. "Trust me, she's clueless. Just a sweet old lady who bakes cookies and tends her garden." The dismissal in her voice cut deeper than I expected. To her, I wasn't Eleanor Williams, who had built a business from nothing, who had put a son through college, who had weathered recessions and kept this place standing when others fell. I was just a sweet old lady, invisible, disposable. I picked up my phone and silently recorded the rest of her conversation, my hand steady despite the anger coursing through me. Another piece of evidence for Maya. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Robert listening to his familiar snores, wondering how many nights we had left under this roof. I slipped out of bed and padded quietly down the hall to the office. Under the dim desk lamp, I opened my journal and began to write, documenting every detail of the day. Times, conversations, observations. Maya had emphasized how important these records could be. "Courts love documentation," she'd said. "Every date, every statement matters." I was so absorbed in my writing that I didn't hear the footsteps until they were right outside the door. I quickly closed the journal and slid it under some recipe books, just as Robert appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice soft with false concern. Just working on some new breakfast ideas for the summer menu, I said, gesturing to the recipe books. He stepped into the room, and I felt my space shrink. For 40 years, I had never feared my husband's presence. Now it made my skin prickle with awareness. "You work too hard, Eleanor," he said, moving behind me to massage my shoulders. "Always worrying about this old place." His hands on my shoulders felt foreign now, his touch an invasion rather than a comfort. I forced myself not to stiffen to accept the gesture, as I would have before. "It's worth worrying about," I replied, keeping my voice light. "Magnolia Haven is our legacy." His hands paused for just a moment, then resumed their motion. "Legacy," he repeated as if tasting the word. "Sometimes I wonder if we've become too tied to this place. There's a whole world out there, Eleanor, places we could see if we weren't always tied down here." I turned to look up at him, searching his face for the man I had loved. "This isn't a prison, Robert. It's our home." Something flickered in his eyes, regret perhaps, or just calculation. He bent to kiss my forehead, a gesture so familiar, yet now so empty. "Come back to bed," he said. "The recipes can wait till morning." I nodded and followed him back to our bedroom, my journal safely hidden away. But as I lay in the dark, I realized something had shifted. For the first time, I had seen through his words to the strategy beneath. He was laying groundwork, trying to prepare me for the idea of leaving Magnolia Haven, planting seeds he hoped would flower into willingness. Little did he know I was planting seeds of my own, seeds of resistance. The next day, a sleek black SUV pulled into our driveway just after the breakfast service. Through the kitchen window, I watched two men in expensive suits emerge. One was older with salt and pepper hair, Barrow I would later learn. The other was younger with sharp features and calculating eyes. "Mendez." Robert hurried out to greet them, his posture suddenly straighter, his gestures more expansive than I'd seen in years. Vanessa appeared from somewhere immaculate in a cream-colored dress I'd never seen before. Michael caught my eye from across the kitchen. "Crown Ridge," he mouthed silently. I nodded, wiped my hands on my apron, and stepped out onto the porch. Time for another performance. "Eleanor," Robert called, his voice too bright. "Come meet our guests. Mr. Barrow and Mr. Mendez are real estate consultants interested in historic properties." I approached with a welcoming smile, noting how Barrow's eyes assessed me, categorizing, dismissing. "Lovely to meet you," I said, extending my hand. "Welcome to Magnolia Haven." "Mrs. Williams," Barrow said, his handshake brief and impersonal. "Your husband has been telling us about this charming property, such an interesting piece of local history. Would you like a tour?" I offered, watching Robert's face tighten slightly. This wasn't part of his script. "That would be wonderful," Mendez replied before Robert could intervene. I led them through the inn, telling stories about each room, each feature. The carved staircase my grandfather had restored, the reading nook where local children gathered for story time in the 1960s, the garden where we'd hosted community events for 4 decades. The foundations date back to 1872, I explained as we walked the perimeter. After Sherman's March, many families rebuilt with whatever they could salvage. These bricks have survived over 150 years of history. With each story I watched, their expression shift from polite interest to something more calculating. I wasn't just showing them rooms, I was showing them obstacles. Every historical detail I highlighted was another complication for their modernization plans, another potential preservation requirement. When we reached the rose garden, I paused by my favorite bench. "This is the heart of Magnolia Haven," I said quietly. "Not just a property, but a living piece of our community's story." Barrow cleared his throat. "Very moving, Mrs. Williams. Now perhaps we could discuss some business matters." "Of course," I said pleasantly, "though I should mention that we've recently applied for historical landmark designation. Once approved, any structural changes would require review by the County Preservation Board." The look that passed between Barrow and Mendez was brief but unmistakable. Alarm. Robert stepped forward quickly. "Eleanor, why don't you check on the kitchen while we talk? I'm sure our guests would appreciate some of your famous iced tea." I nodded agreeably and headed toward the house, feeling their eyes on my back. In the kitchen, I turned to Michael, who was pretending to chop vegetables. "They're here to assess," I whispered, "probably for a final offer." Michael nodded grimly. Maya called. The judge signed the emergency order this morning. It takes effect at midnight tonight. A wave of relief washed through me. Just a few more hours of pretending, and the first layer of protection would be in place. Back on the porch, I served iced tea and homemade cookies, the perfect picture of Southern hospitality. Barrow set his briefcase on the table and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "We understand the emotional attachment," he said smoothly, "but please take a look. This is just a draft, a memorandum of understanding. You and your family will keep your name on the sign, but the management terms will transfer to us. That's how Magnolia Haven can grow." I took the stack, flipped a few pages, and saw the cold phrases clearly. Transfer of operating control, full financial authorization. I set the papers down, looked straight at Robert, and asked one question. Who currently has signing authority? The whole porch fell silent. Robert froze, his eyes darting like he was searching for an exit. His lips moved, but nothing came out. Vanessa shot him a look, clearly waiting for him to speak. But Michael answered firmly instead, calm, but ringing clear. The legal owners and signatories are Eleanor Williams and Michael Williams. He said each word precisely as if drawing a line that could not be crossed. The air seemed to harden. Mendez gave a small cough. Barrow awkwardly closed the file. They looked at each other, then at Robert, hoping for a different response. Nothing but silence. Finally, Barrow forced a smile and said, "We understand perhaps this isn't the right time. We'll be in touch." They pulled back, obviously flustered. The SUV engine roared to life and rolled slowly down the gravel drive. I stood there watching, saying nothing. Beside me, Michael stood straight, like a soldier who'd just won a small battle. Vanessa was different. Her face was tight. One corner of her mouth curled up, but her eyes were on fire. As soon as they left, she yanked out her phone, thumbs flying at a frantic speed. I knew those messages weren't about wedding flowers. Robert came closer, trying to play it cool. "It's just negotiation, Eleanor. People always push for more, but it doesn't mean we're agreeing to anything." I looked at him without replying, and I could see the strain under the mask. That night I sat alone in the office, the desk lamp shining on a notebook, already thick with pages of notes. I wrote down the time, detailed the meeting, the looks, the gestures, and especially Robert and Vanessa's reactions. Then I sent an encrypted report to Maya. When I hit send, my heart felt heavy, but steady. I knew after failing at my doorstep they wouldn't take the straightforward route again. Vanessa's whisper from the porch the night before kept echoing. "Speed it up. The buyer's getting impatient." I understood the next step would be the shortcut, and that meant this fight was about to get harsher than ever. The tension in Magnolia Haven grew like a summer storm gathering force. Robert and I circled each other cautiously, our conversations reduced to surface pleasantries. Vanessa's visits became more frequent, her eyes constantly tracking my movements. I noticed small changes around the house. Files moved slightly from where I'd left them, my desk drawer left partially open. The distinct feeling that someone had been through my belongings. They were searching for something, perhaps the originals of the documents they'd forged, or evidence of my awareness of their scheme. Whatever it was, they grew increasingly desperate as the days passed. One afternoon, I entered the garden shed to find it in disarray, my gardening journals scattered across the workbench. I carefully put everything back in place, noting what had been disturbed. That evening, I moved my real journal to a new hiding place inside a hollowed-out copy of To Kill a Mockingbird on the living room shelf. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight. Michael and I developed a silent language of our own. A tap on the counter meant, "They're listening." A comment about the weather was code for updates from Maya. We lived like spies in our own home, hyper-aware of every sound, every glance. The strain began to show on Michael. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, and his normally steady hands sometimes trembled slightly as he helped with breakfast prep. One evening I found him alone on the back porch, staring out at the gathering dusk. "You should get some rest," I said softly, joining him at the railing. He shook his head. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see everything we could lose." I placed my hand over his. "We won't lose it." Michael turned to me, his face tight with worry. "Maybe we're taking too long, Mom. Maybe we should just confront them now, get it over with. No, I said firmly. Maya said we need to wait. The court order is in place. Banks won't process any transfers now. We're gathering evidence every day. But at what cost? Michael's voice cracked slightly. I hate seeing you like this, living in fear in your own home, jumping at shadows. I straightened my shoulders. I'm not afraid, Michael. I'm patient. There's a difference. He looked unconvinced. Dad found your application for the historical designation. He was in the office shredding papers when I walked in. He just looked at me and said it was cleaning up old files. We both knew he was lying. My stomach tightened. Did he find anything else? I don't think so. But Mom, they're getting desperate. Desperate people do dangerous things. I nodded slowly. Then we need to be more careful. No confrontations, not yet. We follow the plan. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Maya. The court had scheduled a hearing for the following week. The evidence was mounting. She attached bank statements showing suspicious transfers from the Magnolia Haven LLC account, thousands of dollars moving through various shell companies. As I studied the statements, a cold realization washed over me. This wasn't just about selling the inn. Robert and Vanessa had already been siphoning money for months. My life's work was being drained away dollar by dollar while I cooked breakfast and tended gardens. The next morning, Vanessa breezed into the kitchen wearing a new designer outfit. Something shifted inside me, a simmering anger I'd been suppressing for weeks. "That's a lovely dress," I said conversationally. "Special occasion?" She smiled brightly. "Just meeting some friends for lunch. I thought I'd dress up a bit." I nodded, noticing the label peeking out from her collar. The same designer whose prices I'd always considered outrageous, whose dresses I'd admired in magazines but never dreamed of buying. Now I understood how she afforded such luxuries. My money, my labor, my sacrifices. "Enjoy your lunch," I said, turning back to my baking. As soon as she left, Robert appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, watching me work, an odd expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "We haven't had a dinner out, just the two of us, in ages. How about tonight, that Italian place you like in Buckhead?" I looked up surprised. This wasn't part of the pattern we'd established. Robert hadn't suggested a date night in years. "Any special reason?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He shrugged a carefully casual gesture. "Just thought it would be nice to talk, away from all this." He gestured around the kitchen. Something in his eyes made me wary. Was this a peace offering? A distraction? Or something more sinister? "That sounds lovely," I said, deciding to play along. "I'll wear that blue dress you always liked." Robert smiled, relief evident in his face. "Perfect. I'll make a reservation for 7. As soon as he left, I texted Michael and Maya. Something was changing in the dynamic. Robert's invitation felt like a move in a chess game I couldn't quite read yet. Maya's response came quickly. "Be careful. Keep your phone with you. Record everything." Michael's was more direct. "I don't like this. Let me come with you." I replied to both, assuring them I would be cautious, but that this might be an opportunity to learn more. Inside, though, my nerves jangled with warning. Robert rarely did anything without calculation these days. This dinner invitation had purpose behind it. That afternoon, I was folding linens in the guest room when I heard raised voices from Robert's study. I moved closer to the partially open door, listening. "You promised it would be done by now," Vanessa's voice sharp with accusation. "Crown Ridge isn't going to wait forever." "I'm handling it," Robert replied, his tone defensive. "These things take time. Eleanor's not stupid." "Obviously she's not, since she applied for that historical designation," Vanessa snapped. "Do you have any idea what that could do to the sale price? The whole point was minimal restrictions." "I told you I'm handling it," Robert repeated, his voice harder now. "Tonight. I'll talk to her tonight." "And say what? Please sign away your life's work so I can run off with a woman half your age. That should go over well." Robert's voice dropped to a dangerous level. "Watch yourself, Vanessa. Don't forget who brought you into this deal in the first place." There was a pause. Then Vanessa's tone shifted to something softer, more manipulative. "I'm sorry. I'm just worried. We've come so far. I don't want to see it fall apart now." "It won't," Robert assured her. "By this time tomorrow, we'll have what we need." I backed away silently, my heart pounding. The dinner invitation suddenly made perfect sense. Robert planned to get me alone, away from Michael, away from the inn, to do what? Pressure me, threaten me, try to manipulate me into signing something. I hurried to the garden shed and called Maya, relaying everything I'd overheard. "Don't go," she said immediately. "Cancel the dinner." I considered her advice, then slowly shook my head, though she couldn't see it. "No, this is an opportunity. If he shows his hand, we gain advantage." "Eleanor, this is too risky. We don't know what he's planning." "I need to know what he's willing to do," I insisted. "And I need him out of the house. Michael can watch Vanessa. If they try anything while we're gone, we'll catch them in the act." Maya was silent for a long moment. "At least let me arrange for someone to be at the restaurant, just in case." I agreed, and we quickly formulated a plan. I would go to dinner with Robert. Michael would stay at the inn, monitoring Vanessa's movements. Maya would have a colleague at the restaurant watching discreetly, and Lieutenant Ramirez would be on standby, ready to move if necessary. As evening approached, I dressed with care, choosing the dark blue dress Robert once praised at an anniversary party years ago. I applied makeup deliberately, creating the image of the wife he used to be proud to hold hands with. But my eyes weren't the same anymore, resolute where they once had been trusting. Before leaving, I set my purse on the entry table, then deliberately walked back upstairs, muttering about forgetting earrings. As planned, this gave Michael time to activate the small recording device in my purse and confirm it was working. When I came back down, Robert was waiting by the door, dressed in a suit I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, looking at him in the soft light of the entry hall, I felt a pang of grief for what we'd once been. For the young couple who had stood on the porch of Magnolia Haven 40 years ago, full of dreams and plans for the future. That couple was gone now, replaced by strangers wearing familiar faces. "Ready?" Robert asked, offering his arm with old-world courtesy. I nodded, taking his arm with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Ready." As we drove away from Magnolia Haven, I glanced back at the house silhouetted against the darkening sky. Michael stood at an upstairs window watching us leave. Through the open downstairs window, I could see Vanessa on her phone, her blonde hair catching the last light as she paced the floor. Robert drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching to adjust the radio. Old habits, familiar movements. But the air between us was charged with unspoken accusations. "Beautiful evening," I commented as we turned onto the main road. Robert nodded. "Storm coming tomorrow, though. Weather service says it could be a bad one." I looked out the window at the heavy clouds gathering on the horizon, dark shapes against the fading blue. "Yes," I agreed quietly. "I believe it will be." The restaurant was busy, filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the clink of silverware against fine china. The maitre d' led us to a secluded table in the corner, just as Robert had requested. Private. Away from prying eyes and listening ears, perfect for a confrontation. Candlelight flickered across the table, casting warm light on the crystal glasses and white linen. Robert ordered wine, an expensive vintage we would never have splurged on in earlier years. He was setting a stage, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and luxury. I sipped my water, watching him over the rim of the glass, waiting for the performance to begin. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his eyes studying my face. "That color always suited you." "Thank you," I replied simply. We ordered food, exchanged pleasantries about the menu, discussed a recent article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Surface conversation, the kind strangers might have. All the while I felt the weight of the recording device in my purse, capturing every word. It wasn't until the main course arrived that Robert finally broached his true purpose. He set down his fork, took a long sip of wine, and leaned forward slightly. "Eleanor," he began, his voice shifting to a more intimate tone. "We need to talk about Magnolia Haven." I kept my expression neutral. "What about it?" "I've been thinking a lot about our future, about what comes next for us." He reached across the table, attempting to take my hand. I allowed the contact, though his touch now felt alien against my skin. "Go on." "We're not getting any younger, Eleanor. Running that place is becoming a burden. All the maintenance, the daily grind of hosting guests. Don't you ever think about what life could be without all that responsibility?" I tilted my head slightly. Magnolia Haven isn't a burden to me, Robert. It's my joy. A flicker of frustration crossed his face before he masked it with concern. I understand that, but think about it. We could sell now while the market is hot. Take that money and truly enjoy our retirement. Travel, see the world, do all the things we always talked about but never had time for. Is that what the meeting with those men was about? I asked directly. Selling Magnolia Haven. Robert hesitated, then nodded slowly. Crown Ridge has made an extremely generous offer. More money than we ever dreamed of having, Eleanor. We could live like royalty for the rest of our days. And the LLC you created 2 years ago, was that part of preparing for this generous offer? The color drained from his face. His hand withdrew from mine, retreating like a wounded animal. How did you... No, I finished for him. I know everything, Robert. The LLC, the forged signatures, the hotel rooms with Vanessa, the money you've been moving through shell accounts. The silence between us stretched taut as a wire. Around us, the restaurant continued its normal rhythm of conversation and movement, oblivious to the earthquake happening at our small corner table. Robert's expression cycled rapidly through shock, fear, calculation, and finally settled on something like resignation mixed with defiance. You don't understand, he said, his voice low and urgent. This is an opportunity, Eleanor. More money than we could make in 20 more years of running that place. That place is my home, I replied steadily. Our home. The home we built together, the home where we raised our son. It's just a house, he hissed, mask slipping further. Just wood and bricks. No, I said firmly. It's my legacy, my life's work, and it's not yours to sell. Robert's eyes hardened. I've already signed preliminary paperwork. The deal is in motion. With my forged signature, I stated flatly. He flinched slightly but pushed on. I'll give you a fair share. We can split it. I wasn't going to leave you with nothing. The audacity of his statement struck me like a physical blow, as if I should be grateful that he planned to give me a fair share of what was entirely mine to begin with. How generous of you, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Robert leaned forward, desperation creeping into his tone. Be reasonable, Eleanor. This is happening one way or another. Crown Ridge wants Magnolia Haven, and they're prepared to pay top dollar. You can fight it and get nothing, or you can cooperate and walk away wealthy. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my purse. Michael's name flashed on the screen. My heart jumped as I answered. Mom. His voice was a tight whisper. They're gathering files and jewelry. Vanessa has 2 men with her. They're emptying the safe in Dad's office. Maya called the police. Ramirez and the team will be there in a few minutes. I pushed back my chair. It scraped loud against the floor. Where are you going? Robert asked, panic rising in his voice. I have to go home, I said, standing up. He reached out frantic. Eleanor, wait. No need to blow this up. Sit down and let me explain. I brushed his hand aside and headed for the door. I knew the thing Robert feared most wasn't losing assets. It was me seeing with my own eyes what was happening in my house. We got in the car. Robert gripped the wheel, his hands white-knuckled, veins raised. He stomped the gas. The car shot along the Atlanta streets. Wind whistled through the crack in the window, hot asphalt smell rising thick. I stared out as buildings blurred past streetlights, flaring and vanishing like a slow-motion reel. I wondered how many homes across this country hold secrets no one dares say out loud. How many wives, how many mothers have sat in a car like me, knowing the betrayal, staying steady while waiting for the truth to surface. Robert drove faster, sweat beading on his forehead. I could see panic swallowing him. He knew tonight was the turning point. His game had spun out of control. He exhaled and almost begged, Eleanor, I just wanted a new start. You have to believe me. I didn't answer. I stared straight ahead, and then as we turned into Magnolia Haven's entrance, red and blue lights flashed across the front lot. Police cars were already there, lights strobing over brick and wooden fence. In that moment, I knew everything Michael and I had prepared for was bearing fruit. The truth was about to hit the table like face-up cards. And Robert, the man who once laid the inn's bricks with me, would have to face it. No way out. The car shot through the last curve back to Magnolia Haven, and the red and blue had already washed the whole yard. The flashing lights stuttered across the wood siding, the house walls, the tall magnolias, and the stone plaque where Robert and I carved our names over 40 years ago. Georgia wind carried heavy damp and a distant growl of thunder. The porch I knew so well now looked like a stage where the final act was dropping. I gripped my purse strap, stepped out, and the wind whipped my blue dress around my legs. Wet earth magnolia blossoms and the metallic smell of police cars mixed into the thick scent of endings. Right on the steps, Vanessa was in cuffs. Her pale wrists jerked against bright metal shoulders, shaking. She shrieked, voice sharp, "You've got it wrong. I didn't do anything." A clean, cold click of a weapon behind her cut the line short. Vanessa's eyes darted wild. On the porch floor, her fancy leather suitcase lay open. My jewelry pouch neatly folded documents and a silver USB stick catching flashlight beams. Next to her, 2 unfamiliar men were pinned over their SUV's hood. One bald with a faded tattoo growled, "I'm just the guy they hired to haul stuff." The other, hair slicked with sweat, couldn't speak. His face was a blur of fear and defeat. Lieutenant James Ramirez stood square on the porch, tall and broad-shouldered uniform damp with rain. His voice carried through the storm, clipped and clear. "You are under arrest for possession of stolen property and conspiracy to defraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." He signaled, and a young officer in white gloves held up a sealed leather pouch. I recognized it instantly, my chest clenched. Inside were the emerald earrings my mother gave me when I turned 21, the pearl necklace Robert bought in New York for our 20th anniversary, and the diamond ring I'd kept in the safe since the day Michael was born. Now they were evidence pieces of my life taken and returned in shame. Ramirez lifted another envelope and opened it for me to see. Inside were the USB and copies of transfer papers. "We recovered the code you sent," he said. "These are the forged signatures, the management transfer contracts, and the money moved from the LLC account to a middle wallet. There's no denying it." I looked to Michael. He stood under the porch hair, wet with rain jacket, dusty with wood flecks. His eyes shone in that chaos, relieved and hurting at once. When I stepped over, he wrapped an arm around my shoulders and whispered, "You're here. Everything happened exactly like you said. The police got here in time." I nodded, my throat tight. All the fear, the anger, and the hope I'd held for months broke open, but not the way I'd imagined. No screaming, no tears, only a deep quiet like a lake after a storm when everything sinks to the bottom. Behind us, Robert stepped out of the car. Red and blue strobes washed his face, bone pale. He moved slowly, eyes searching, then stopped in front of me. His voice cracked. "Eleanor, you have to hear me out. This is all a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to hurt you." I looked at him for a long time. So many years breakfast with laughter, Christmas lights, nights by the fire listening to rain. Now all I saw was a small, shaking stranger. I spoke softly, each word heavy as stone. "This is my house. No one has the right to take it, least of all the person who built it with me." Ramirez stepped forward and motioned to 2 officers. He said simply, "Arrest the suspect Robert Williams as an accomplice in property fraud." Robert's hands were pulled behind him. The clink of handcuffs rang bright in the night. He lifted his head, eyes locked on mine. No trace of the old confidence, only a flash of fear and too late regret. "Eleanor," his voice broke, "I never wanted it to end like this." I didn't answer. Words meant nothing now. Some betrayals can't be patched with apologies. I watched as they led him to the car, and the metal door slammed one hard thud, sealing a life we'd shared that had rotted long ago. As the car rolled out of the yard, I stood under the magnolia porch. Rain thickened, hitting the roof, the steps, and my shoulders. I didn't wipe it away. The cold drops felt like a final washing, rinsing off the grime of the years I'd been deceived. Michael came close and set his jacket over my shoulders. I felt my son's warmth, the resolve in the way he stood beside me. Not the child who once feared thunder, but the man who had walked with me through the biggest fight of our lives. I squeezed his hand and whispered, "It's over now, Michael." He nodded, eyes fixed on the magnolias. The tall trunks stood firm in the rain branches swaying in the wind, their rustling steady like a farewell song for a marriage that had just ended. In that moment, I felt they were speaking for me. It was time to close the door. Lieutenant Ramirez turned back, his voice low but kind. "Mrs. Williams, I'll be honest. Very few people stay as composed as you did. In most cases, folks either fall apart or let their emotions wreck the plan. You saved yourself and your property." I gave a small smile, my breath fading into the damp air. "I only did what I had to do to protect this house," I said. "My house and my son's." Ramirez nodded, gave me a brief farewell, and walked off his shoes, printing the wet ground. The police cars left one by one until only the porch light's pale glow and the steady rain remained. I stood there a long time looking at my house in the dark. The wooden frames, the steps, the old roof, everything was still there, still solid like my own heart after all the storms. I realized I didn't need to collapse to be pitied. Sometimes silence and resolve are the only answers a betrayer deserves. A final gust blew through, carrying the warm resin scent of magnolia, like the old season saying goodbye. I lifted my head, drew a deep breath, then gently closed the porch door, my chest lighter than it had been in years. The next morning, Atlanta seemed to wake up to my news. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a bold headline, "The Magnolia Haven Case, a shock in the heart of a historic neighborhood." Just below was the familiar photo, the front of my house in stormlight and police flashers. A small caption read, "A small but complex property fraud investigation, tangled with family corporate ties and trust." I sat in the living room, coffee cooling in my hand. Michael set the papers on the table and said carefully, "Did you ever think you'd be on the front page, Mom?" I shook my head with a tired smile. "No, but at least the truth has a name." In the weeks that followed, the truth peeled back in layers. Piece by piece, the picture came into the light. Police released preliminary findings. Vanessa Miller, her real name, had been a mid-level employee at Crown Ridge Holdings, tasked with scouting and persuading owners of promising properties. In old files, there was even a photo of her at a project launch in Charleston, beaming as she shook hands with one of the company's vice presidents. The two men arrested that night confessed as well. They'd been hired to clear out documents and jewelry for a few $1,000s in cash. "We just did what we were told," one statement read. "We heard the place was about to be handed over to a new owner, so it had to be cleared fast." I reread that line in the report, my hand tightening. "Handed over to a new owner." They said it like an auction lot, not the home I'd built with my youth. Robert was held for a few days, then released on bond awaiting trial. On the first court day, he walked in with his head down, gaunt face, stubble eyes empty. I sat in the back row among a thicket of cameras and reporters. As the prosecutor read the charges, fraud, forgery, aiding, and unlawful transfer of assets, my heartbeat slowed. Robert's lawyer cited a late-life crisis, said he was lost after retirement, and that Vanessa exploited the emotions of a man searching for meaning. I looked down at my hands, not angry, just quietly sad. The man I once loved was being excused with cheap lines. He admitted part of the wrongdoing, hoping for leniency. I didn't look at him again. When the gavel came down, everything between us was truly over. Meanwhile, Maya and her financial team kept tracking the money drained from the Magnolia Haven LLC account. After weeks, they identified nearly $2 million routed through multiple layers, shell companies, and account in the Caymans, then back to the U.S. Most of it was frozen in time, thanks to the emergency court order Maya filed the very day we set the trap. "If we'd been a night late, they would have moved it all," Maya said, relief and fatigue in her voice. I just answered softly, "It's all right. Some of it's gone, but the part that matters most is still here." What mattered most wasn't money. It was the house. The divorce moved quickly. Both sides wanted it done. I signed my name again, steady, not angry, just ready to close the chapter. When the judge read the final clause, Magnolia Haven is recognized as a county heritage property. Any sale, transfer, mortgage, or restructuring must go through the Heritage Commission and have the consent of the legal owner, Mrs. Eleanor E. Williams. I looked up, feeling as if someone had laid the last brick to rebuild my life's foundation. After court life slowly found a new rhythm. Michael and I sat in the living room, papers stacked in neat piles. "I think we should reopen Magnolia Haven with a more welcoming angle," Michael said. "Not just a place to stay, somewhere people can feel the history and hear the stories." I looked out the window, late sunlight over the Magnolia porch, warm as those early years after Robert and I married. "Magnolia Haven has always had a soul," I said. "We just need to light it again." And we did. We reopened after 3 months of touch-ups. No flashy upgrades, no new sign, just a small board by the door, Magnolia Haven, a place to come home to. Strangely, after all that turmoil, more guests arrived. Some came out of curiosity, but most stayed because they felt something real. They didn't ask me about the scandal. They asked about the stone walkway, the smell of morning waffles, the old fireplace I still light on winter nights. A young reporter came to write A House That Survived a Con piece. I just smiled. If you write it, write about stubbornness. Write about how a house can stand when the people inside don't fall. Michael and I didn't blast ads. We shared our story with kindness and details. Word spread and Magnolia Haven became a warm stop in Atlanta's outskirts. One day I got a letter from the local culinary school. They asked if I'd partner on an internship program, students learning and serving guests. I said yes immediately. Each season, new young faces filled the kitchen bright with laughter. One afternoon, I watched a brown-haired girl carefully set waffles on a tray. I told her, "Don't be afraid to mess up here. Everything can be fixed, even small mistakes." She smiled, and I realized I was teaching what I had learned through tears. Perseverance. Magnolia Haven settled back into its old rhythm, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't just an inn. It was proof that honesty and grit can survive. Many guests said they felt it as soon as they stepped onto the porch. I believe them. Every plank, every brick, every line in the guest book holds the spirit of what I fought for. Every night, once the house quieted, I walked the Magnolia hallway. Warm yellow light pulled on the ceiling, my shadow stretching long across the old posts. I ran my hand along the wood, feeling each rough grain and hairline crack time left behind. They weren't flaws anymore. They were witnesses of endurance. Softly, almost to myself, I said, "I kept the house. I kept Magnolia Haven, kept my honor, kept my peace, kept my son's trust, the one thing money can never buy back." And when the Georgia wind came down through the magnolias, I heard an answer in their whisper, gentle and steady. "The house kept you too." That morning, fog draped the Atlanta slopes. Early winter air carried the damp scent of earth and fallen leaves, sad and warm at once. I was steeping peach tea when I heard a soft knock. 3 slow taps, hesitant like the person outside wasn't sure. When I opened the door, a woman stood on the porch, a gray wool coat around a thin frame. She lifted her head, eyes deep and tired, but her voice steady. "Mrs. Williams, I'm Margaret Morgan, Vanessa's mother." I stood still for a few seconds, then invited her in. No anger, just a distant feeling like seeing a piece of my past I hadn't closed yet. We sat at the porch table where I'd shared so many mornings of coffee with Robert. Weak sunlight slipped through the magnolias, modeling the tabletop. Margaret held the teacup in both hands, trembling. "I know I have no standing to be here," she began, "but I need to apologize. I raised a daughter who was too ambitious. When I saw her succeed, I blindly believed any sacrifice was worth it. I didn't see the darkness in her until it was too late." I stayed quiet. Wind moved under the eaves like the house sighing. Margaret said Vanessa had always wanted to be above others. When Crown Ridge hired her, Margaret proudly told neighbors her daughter worked for a major company. Then came expensive gifts, unexplained trips, and the growing cold in Vanessa's eyes. That's when she understood her daughter had slipped too far. "You can hate me," Margaret said, voice catching. "But I'm not here to excuse her. I'm here because I know a mother's loss, and I want you to know I never taught her to betray anyone." I exhaled softly. Years of anger and contempt aimed at another woman faded like smoke. I couldn't say I forgave, but I didn't hate anymore. We drank our tea in silence. The peach sweetness and warmth seeped into my chest. We talked about Mother's long winters, the nights waiting for a door that never opened, meals going cold around an empty chair. Margaret looked at me kind and hurting. Maybe we're not so different, Eleanor. The difference is you still have your home. I lost my child. I held her hand gently, not to erase the past, but to acknowledge that a mother's pain wears the same colors. When Margaret left, I watched her fade into the fog and knew it was a meeting that needed no forgiveness to lighten the heart. In the days after, I noticed Michael smiling more. He talked often with Olivia Quinn, a young architectural researcher staying to study historic timberwork. Olivia's soft brown hair and bright eyes followed a thick notebook everywhere. She spoke with excitement about mortise and tenon joints, about how the Magnolia Haven porch was designed to catch morning sun and shed afternoon rain. I watched them on the porch, Michael leaning in to listen, Olivia smiling, her voice moving like music. In the dimming light, they looked like two people rediscovering something lost. My heart, tight for so long, began to unclench. As for me, I relearned how to be alone without feeling empty. I started my journals again, not to complain, but to note small things. The smell of cinnamon toast, the kettle's first bubble, the wind threading through magnolia leaves. Sometimes I sat by the fireplace for hours writing a short line. This morning, the inn smelled like baked apples. Winter is here. Writing told me I was still living, still breathing with this house. One Saturday night, a folk band asked to play in the backyard. I said yes, only asked them to keep it gentle so guests could rest. But when the mandolin began and hand drums found a beat, people gathered laughing and tapping their feet. Under the string lights, faces lit up, smiles passing from one to another. I stood on the steps and felt the inn breathe alive, joyful. After years of strain, I finally felt truly at peace. That night, I called Michael into the office. I opened the old wood cabinet and took out the brass-locked box I call our treasure of keepsakes. Inside were yellowed photos, a silver spoon engraved with my mother's name, a few old letters from Robert, back when he was the man I loved, and the first notebook from when we built the inn. I handed Michael the key. Not to burden you, I said, slow and sure, but to root you. If you ever lose your way, open it. Every piece in here is a shard of this house's soul. Michael took it, eyes wet but grateful. I promise I'll keep it the way you kept Magnolia Haven. I smiled. I believed him. Late that night, once everyone slept, I stepped onto the porch again. A low crescent moon hung over the ridge, the wind bringing back the resin scent I knew by heart. I asked myself, if a letter came someday from Robert, from Vanessa, or from the girl I used to be, would I read it? I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't need to. Sometimes healing doesn't come from answers, but from learning to be quiet, to touch the present, and to smile. One early spring morning, dew still heavy on the lawn, and daffodils just breaking the ground, the mail carrier handed me a thick envelope. The return corner read clearly, Georgia State Prison. My heart dipped. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter from Robert. The handwriting, though shaky and slanted, was unmistakable, the same hand that once signed so many inn documents. He began with an apology, no excuses, no defense. He wrote, Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness only that you read this. I was afraid of getting old, of people seeing me as useless, and I got obsessed with the idea of starting over. Only when I sat in a small cell and stared at a tiny square of sky through bars did I understand what I'd lost wasn't money. It was a home, a family, and you. I read slowly, hearing his old, low voice in my head. He wrote about the emptiness of jail nights, only metal sounds echoing back. He said the hunger to begin again blinded him, and the price was everything real. I sat on the lawn by the porch, the raw green scent of spring grass in the air. I read to the last line, then folded the letter carefully like a keepsake finally put away. Inside, there was no hate left. Forgiveness to me doesn't mean forgetting. It means setting down the burden of anger on the old road and walking forward. I haven't forgotten what Robert did, but I chose not to carry the rage anymore. On the town's spring market opening day, Michael, Olivia, and I set up a small Magnolia Haven booth. Olivia led a group telling the story of the roofline and the foundation stone set in 1982. Michael introduced a new menu, pecan pastries and honey peach tea flavors that make people feel welcome. I sat on the porch watching the crowd flow and hearing laughter and talk, feeling life return around me. I hung a new wind chime under the eaves. When the spring wind moved through, it rang and mingled with the magnolia's whisper. It was the sound of each new day, the sound of the freedom I'd fought to keep. That night, the backyard glowed. Guests circled the wood tables, children ran a folk guitar, strummed under a plain, honest voice. I stood in the middle of the yard, filled my lungs with warm magnolia and wood smoke, and listened to the wind against the porch and the bright bursts of laughter. Peace rose in me, rare and full. I understood the life ahead is mine and belongs to the people I truly love. No more shadows, no more schemes, only endurance renewal and the faith that even after the longest winter spring returns. I am Eleanor Williams, 65 years old, owner of Magnolia Haven. My hands built this place, my heart defended it, and my spirit lives in every corner. There was a time when I thought my age made me invisible, when men in expensive suits looked through me rather than at me. There was a time when I believed my greatest achievements were behind me. I know better now. Age hasn't diminished me. It's given me the strength to fight for what matters. My wrinkles and gray hair aren't signs of fading away. They're medals earned in a long campaign of living. When I look in the mirror, I don't see an old woman. I see a warrior who refused to surrender what was rightfully hers. And when the young women who work in my kitchen watch me move through my day with purpose, I hope they see their own futures reflected back, not as a diminishment, but as a gathering of power. A woman in her 60s isn't at the end of her story. Sometimes she's just beginning her most important chapter. Magnolia Haven stands on the outskirts of Atlanta, its wide porch welcoming travelers from everywhere. But its true foundation isn't brick or stone, it's resilience. The kind that doesn't make headlines or draw attention. The quiet, enduring strength of a woman who refused to be written out of her own story. Sometimes in the soft evening light, I sit on that porch and feel the full weight of what I nearly lost and what I fought to keep. Not just walls and a roof, but dignity. Purpose, a legacy worth passing on. The magnolias bloom white against the deepening sky, sturdy and graceful all at once. Like them, I've weathered storms and emerged still standing. And like them, my roots run deeper than anyone can see. The embers of the hearth still glow, and so do I.